Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. On the morning of October 31st, 2012, Halloween morning in Michigan, a young woman named Rebecca Gee failed to show up at work. Her phone went silent, the house lay empty, and her favorite purse sat spread open on the kitchen table. Colleagues and family were alarmed. Without saying goodbye to anyone, she vanished, leaving behind her 3-year-old son and a home elaborately decorated for the holiday. Soon, it would become clear, someone she fully trusted was behind the disappearance. But in those first hours of the search, no one had any idea how deep the roots of evil ran. By 2012, John Douglas White had gained a reputation in Isabella County, Michigan, as a friendly and devout man. He served as pastor of a small congregation, supported church members, helped neighbors, and cared for the children of a close family friend. Locals regarded him as reliable, polite, and compassionate. His unofficial role as the head of the household in Sally Gee's home only deepened their trust. Nothing about him seemed suspicious. But what people thought they knew about John White was merely a part of a carefully constructed facade. Sally Gee had connected with him online after her husband passed away. Her period of solitude in life coincided with White also seeking a fresh start. He appeared caring, humble, and genuinely faithful. After moving into the neighborhood where the Gee family lived, he quickly became close to them. Dinners with Rebecca, walks with Sally's grandson, shared family chores. All of it, however, was part of a meticulously crafted disguise. Behind the caring neighbor image lay a man with a serious criminal past that almost no one knew about. John White had 2 grave criminal offenses in his past, which he never openly acknowledged. His picture-perfect behavior in prison allowed him early release. Once out, he positioned himself as someone transformed by faith. During his employment at the church, he claimed his past trouble involved a woman misusing prohibited substances, calling the event a tragic accident. And people believed him. In his new life, White acted cautiously. He worked with the congregation, organized meetings, and built relationships in the community. His hidden past, known by almost no one, allowed him to easily manipulate trust. On the surface, John appeared to be a repentant Christian, but behind that facade were the same dark impulses that had once landed him in prison. His story was not one of redemption. It became a warning of how a carefully concealed biography allows a perpetrator to repeatedly find new victims. Rebecca Gee was born on March 26, 1988, in Midland, Michigan, into a large family with 3 siblings. Her father, Thomas Gee, was a respected member of the community, an experienced horseback riding instructor, and an organizer of charity events benefiting the local children's hospital. Growing up in a household where care, hard work, and faith were valued shaped Rebecca into a compassionate person. From early on, she was calm and diligent. Her school years unfolded in a typical rural environment. She participated in the equestrian team, practiced archery, and helped with charitable projects. Her natural desire to help others became especially evident when her father fell seriously ill. After an incurable diagnosis, he was moved to hospice care, where Rebecca did her best to ease his final days. Losing her father was a profound trial for her, and her family served as both a source of support and responsibility. After graduating high school in 2007, Rebecca chose a career in personal care. She enrolled in cosmetology school and started working as a stylist. Around that time, she was in a relationship with Chad Sando. The relationship didn't last, but they had a son together, whom they named Conway. With his arrival, Rebecca's priorities shifted entirely. Her focus became raising her son and building a stable life. Long hours at the salon were no longer manageable, so she took a job at a retail store in Mount Pleasant. Rebecca quickly earned a reputation as a dependable employee and soon moved up to a managerial position. The new job allowed her to spend more time with her son, which became especially important when her mother, Sally, moved into the Broomfield Valley trailer park and was later joined by her new partner, John White. After Conway was born, Rebecca rented a home nearby. Living close to her mother provided much-needed support with parenting. John White, who lived across the street, gradually became a fixture in their day-to-day lives. He cooked dinner, looked after Conway, dropped him off at daycare, and helped around the house. Rebecca allowed her mother's partner to be involved in her son's routine, relying on him for help with household tasks. Her personal life was also moving forward. Sometime after her breakup with Chad, Rebecca met Aaron Quinn. He accepted her son as his own, formed a warm bond with the boy, and was planning to propose. Their relationship was well liked by those around them, and Aaron's family welcomed Rebecca with kindness. Sally and John White also supported her new relationship. Rebecca led a modest but steady life. Her job, her son, and her relationship seemed like a solid foundation for a happy future. Though naturally reserved, Rebecca did open up to close ones about her thoughts. She appreciated John's help, though she kept quiet about a few of his more peculiar habits. He was there when she was sick, brought her medicine, stayed with Conway when she was away. His involvement seemed helpful, and any red flags felt minor. Her habit of trusting people her mother approved of reinforced her sense of safety. Rebecca didn't have any known conflicts with anyone and didn't lead a high-risk lifestyle. She was focused on her son, working toward career goals and building a life with someone she loved. John White, who had quietly settled into her everyday routine through her mother's circle, appeared to be a reliable part of her surroundings. Outwardly, her life seemed orderly and free of danger. It was this appearance of stability that would later make the tragedy all the more shocking. In late October 2012, Rebecca Gee was preparing for her favorite holiday, Halloween. Her son, Conway, had just turned 3, and this was going to be his first real Halloween, a costume, decorations, and trick-or-treating. He had a Spider-Man costume ready, and Rebecca went all out decorating the house. She set up 8 scarecrows by the entrance, hung artificial cobwebs, and placed themed signs around the yard. Her workplace had just received a new shipment of Halloween decor, and Rebecca made good use of it. She looked forward to the day with excitement. The night before, she stayed home with Conway. On the morning of October 31st, she planned to drop him off at his father Chad Sando's place for the day and pick him up later for trick-or-treating. On the evening of October 30th, Rebecca spoke with her mom, Sally, on the phone, sharing her plans and how excited Conway was. She also messaged her partner, Aaron Quinn. At 10:43 p.m., he wished her goodnight, and when she didn't reply, he assumed she had already gone to sleep, which wasn't unusual for their routine. Halloween morning began with a visit from John White, Sally's fiancé. Due to a scheduling change, Rebecca had asked him to take Conway to Chad's. John arrived at her trailer around 7 a.m. The porch light was still on, and the door was unlocked. Upon entering, he heard the water running in the bathroom. Rebecca called out that Conway was still sleeping and asked him to turn off the heat before he left. John lay down on the couch and dozed off. Around 8 a.m., he was woken up by Conway. Rebecca was no longer there. John said she'd already left for work. He got Conway dressed and dropped him off at his father's place. But at the store where Rebecca was responsible for opening the morning shift, her absence was immediately noticed. Skipping a shift without any notice was out of character for her. She held a managerial role and was in charge of opening. Attempts to reach her by phone failed. The device was either off or out of range. That's when one of the managers decided to drive to her house to check if everything was okay. At the trailer park, the manager knocked on the door, but no one answered. The door was locked, and there were no signs of movement inside. Circling around the home, he noticed something strange. Rebecca's light blue Buick wasn't in its usual spot on the driveway. Instead, it was parked near a nearby bar, just a short distance away. There was always plenty of space in front of her home, and she had never parked there before. Visiting a bar that early in the morning seemed unlikely. Rebecca was either headed to work or spending time with her son. The manager stepped inside the bar to ask if anyone had seen her. The bartender said he'd noticed the car, but Rebecca hadn't come in. At the manager's request, the trailer's owner opened the door to her home. Inside, everything looked like she hadn't been planning to go anywhere. Her purse, which she always took with her, was still on the table. Her phone and keys were missing. The house was neat, but she was gone. The colleague immediately reported the odd situation to Sally and John. Once they heard that Rebecca hadn't shown up, Sally and John rushed to the house. Their concern grew rapidly. Rebecca wasn't answering her phone, and no one had any idea where she might be. Neighbors began gathering around the trailer, speculating about what could have happened. A sudden trip, a medical issue, maybe a car accident. But none of the theories checked out. It was becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't just someone running late for work. By noon, Sally contacted the county sheriff's department. The initial police response was minimal. Technically, Rebecca was an adult, and her temporary absence didn't trigger an urgent response. Officers decided to hold off on an active search until 4:30 p.m. in case she returned on her own. That delay cost precious time. In those hours, investigators could have canvassed the area, reviewed surveillance footage, or interviewed potential witnesses. It wasn't until she failed to pick up her son that her disappearance was officially treated as suspicious. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the home and car, but by then, over 4 hours had passed since she was first reported missing. In the meantime, friends and family launched their own search efforts. They called co-workers, neighbors, anyone who might have heard from her. John reached out to members of his church, asking them to support Sally and report anything unusual. He repeated the same story, that he had dropped off Conway at his father's place and hadn't seen Rebecca since she called out to him from the bathroom. That detail raised some eyebrows, but at the time, no one pressed further. The situation only became more confusing. None of the usual explanations made sense. Rebecca hadn't left voluntarily, wasn't visiting anyone, and hadn't turned up at any hospital. She had simply vanished, without warning, without witnesses, and without any clear trail. For those who knew her, the disappearance was devastating. One question echoed in everyone's minds. How could someone disappear from their own home, in broad daylight, leaving no real clues behind? Once it became clear that Rebecca wasn't returning and couldn't be reached, the case was officially elevated to a high-priority investigation. Police started with the most obvious step, looking into her closest relationships. Their focus turned to the men in Rebecca's life, her current partner, Aaron Quinn, and her former partner, Conway's father, Chad Sandow. Statistically, those closest to a missing woman are most likely to have relevant information or potential involvement. Aaron was questioned first. He willingly came to the station and gave a full account of everything he remembered. Their last contact had been through text messages on the evening of October 30th. By the next morning, Rebecca's phone was either turned off or out of service. That detail helped investigators narrow down a likely window of time for her disappearance. Phone location data and message history confirmed that Aaron had spent the night at home. His demeanor raised no red flags. He appeared genuinely distressed, was open about his relationship with Rebecca, and even admitted he had been planning to propose. He'd been saving up for a ring and hoped Halloween, her favorite holiday, would be the perfect moment. There had been no recent arguments between them, and witnesses confirmed the seriousness of their relationship. Next, police questioned Chad Sandow. He, too, cooperated fully. According to him, he and Rebecca maintained a stable co-parenting arrangement. On the morning of October 31st, he saw John White, who brought Conway over. Nothing about that exchange seemed out of the ordinary. Chad's alibi held up. He was at work the entire day, verified by surveillance footage. His contact with Rebecca revolved solely around parenting matters. There was no reason to suspect him. With both men cleared from the list of primary suspects, investigators turned their attention to John White, the last person known to have seen Rebecca. He said he stopped by that morning to take Conway to Chad's and found Rebecca in the bathroom getting ready for work. According to him, after the boy woke up, he dressed him and drove him to Chad's. By then, Rebecca had supposedly already left. At first glance, his story seemed plausible, but inconsistencies began to emerge. During questioning, detectives noticed fresh cuts and scratches on White's face and hands. He had a noticeable bruise on his nose. He claimed the injuries were from a shell falling on him while doing repairs in his trailer, and even offered to show where it happened. Detectives noted his explanation but also recognized that these kinds of marks could come from a struggle. His behavior added to their concerns. White emphasized his willingness to help almost excessively and kept repeating that he had no idea where Rebecca might be. It came across as an effort to steer the investigation. He gave a detailed account of his actions that morning, but couldn't pinpoint when exactly Rebecca had left the house. This raised an obvious question. If he didn't see her leave, why was he so sure she was gone? Minute by minute, White's account was becoming less credible. There was no direct evidence against him yet, but his status had shifted. He was now the only known person to have seen Rebecca before she disappeared, and his story had questionable elements. Police decided not to rule him out as a suspect and quietly placed him under surveillance. Once investigators began to doubt John White's version of events, they started interviewing people who knew him personally. The first signs of concern came from Rebecca's co-workers. They shared that she had, on several occasions, expressed a subtle discomfort around White. She hadn't made any accusations or described his behavior as threatening, but she did mention feeling uneasy when he was nearby. According to her colleagues, John had shown up at her home unannounced, dropped by her workplace, and occasionally made compliments that felt inappropriate or overly intense. After Rebecca started dating Aaron Quinn, these incidents became noticeably more frequent. During his conversation with police, Aaron also confirmed that John White had shown an unsettling level of interest in Rebecca. He recalled how, after she had gotten a permanent makeup procedure, White would bring it up frequently, comment on her appearance, and look for excuses to be near her. According to Aaron, this attention had long crossed the line of friendly concern. It felt obsessive. White wasn't behaving like a mentor figure or a supportive partner to her mother, but more like someone who couldn't handle the idea of someone else being close to her. John White's sister later told investigators that her brother had often brought up Rebecca in conversations. He would complain that she had stopped coming by to visit, and said her behavior changed after Aaron entered the picture. He even blamed Rebecca for pushing him out of their usual circle, calling her ungrateful and distant. All of this, despite the fact that he was in a relationship with her mother. At the time, his sister hadn't thought much of it, but after Rebecca disappeared, those conversations took on a much darker tone. In light of these testimonies, police decided to dig deeper into White's background. Official databases showed an incomplete picture. There were gaps in his history that didn't quite add up. Investigators began combing through archived records to reconstruct his past. Around this time, John agreed to take a polygraph test. Initially, he had refused, but under pressure from Sally Gee, he eventually consented. For him, it seemed like a way to clear his name, but for detectives, it was a chance to engage him in a less formal setting. On the way to the neighboring city where the polygraph would be administered, an important conversation took place. In the car, White brought it up himself. He admitted to the detective that he had a prior conviction, something neither his fiancée nor his church community knew. He described it as an old story involving a conflict with a woman. According to him, the charges were exaggerated and the punishment harsher than it should have been. He claimed that part of his life was long behind him, that faith had changed him, and he was no longer the same man. But the investigators weren't convinced. What stood out was this. If the matter had truly been minor, why had he hidden it for so many years, even from the woman he was planning to marry? More troubling, he had never disclosed it to church leadership either. That level of secrecy clashed sharply with the image of a reformed, trustworthy man that he was projecting. Background checks confirmed their suspicions. White had a criminal history involving serious offenses tied to aggressive behavior. The way he had tried to downplay it didn't match the records. The files named specific victims and outlined serious allegations. It became clear to detectives that White's past was far darker than he let on. His evasiveness, emotional reactions, and intense need to hide the truth now made complete sense. Meanwhile, residents of the trailer park and members of the community began sharing memories. Up until this point, John White had been viewed as a devout man, actively involved in church life. He helped families, volunteered for errands, and was known for supporting neighbors. But as rumors spread across town about his possible involvement in Rebecca's disappearance, his once strong reputation started to unravel. A bartender at a local bar recalled that on the morning of October 31st, White had come in asking if anyone had seen Rebecca. This directly contradicted what he told police, that he had only been focused on dropping Conway off at Chad's that morning. Taken together, the new statements, conflicting accounts, and his admission of a criminal record painted a very different picture. Law enforcement no longer viewed John White as just a witness. They now considered him the prime suspect. His interview and his attempts to downplay his past only reinforced what investigators were starting to believe, that behind the mask of virtue was someone capable of much more than he let on. A deeper look into the past of John Douglas White uncovered a string of serious offenses committed long before he ever became a pastor in a small Michigan congregation. His criminal history dated back to 1980. At the time, 22-year-old White had recently left the Navy and gotten married. He became acquainted with his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherton. One day, he invited her into his basement, telling her he wanted to show her a racetrack for toy cars. Unsuspecting, she agreed. Inside the confined space, he suddenly attacked her, stabbing her once near the shoulder blade, then delivering roughly 15 more blows and attempting to strangle her. By some miracle, Teresa managed to break free and escape. At the hospital, she told police that during the assault, White claimed this wasn't his first time doing something like this. He was arrested, found guilty of attempted homicide, and sentenced to 5 to 10 years. However, just 2 years later, he was released as part of a plea deal that included a claim of inadequate defense and a commitment to psychiatric treatment. His supervision was minimal, and his behavior in custody had been deemed satisfactory. After his release, White kept a low profile for several years. By the mid-1990s, he was working in industrial facilities and had secured a job in a commercial laundry operation, maintaining equipment. He was married and expecting his third child. In July 1994, a co-worker of his, 26-year-old Vicky Sue Wall, went missing without a trace. She was last seen in a store parking lot, meeting with John. The two had a secret relationship and occasionally spent time alone in his vehicle. White acknowledged the affair, but claimed he had dropped Vicky off in the same parking lot. He also mentioned having memory gaps that made it hard to recall the specifics. Police had strong suspicions, but no solid evidence. 6 weeks later, a passerby discovered a woman's shoes, undergarments, and a severely decomposed body about 2 miles from the lot. Forensic experts confirmed the remains belonged to Vicky. The cause of death couldn't be definitively determined, but there were signs of strangulation. Clothing had been wrapped around her neck. Initially, John refused to take a polygraph test, but later reached a deal with prosecutors and admitted guilt in a charge of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 8 to 15 years. While the court acknowledged his previous offense, the sentence allowed for early release. While serving his sentence, John White opened up to prison psychologists. He shared that during his time as a truck driver, he often picked up women on highways, people he referred to in a degrading way. According to him, after their encounters, he would force them out of the vehicle near dumpsters, claiming they didn't deserve any respect. No formal complaints were ever filed, but his stories mirrored the pattern of his earlier offenses. In prison, John began to show signs of what appeared to be remorse. The man who would later become a pastor immersed himself in religious literature, joined the prison faith community, and spent significant time in the chapel. Around this time, his wife filed for divorce, and both of his parents passed away. Isolated and alone, he crafted a new version of himself. During therapy sessions, he admitted to disturbing thoughts, including an attraction to lifeless bodies and fantasies of harming legal officials involved in his past trials. Despite these confessions, his conduct was deemed satisfactory, and he was classified as rehabilitating. In 2007, before serving the full term, John White was released. He obtained minister credentials and joined a church. He rebranded his past, telling people he had once been involved with a woman who used prohibited substances and that she had passed away from an overdose. He claimed he fled out of panic. That version of events raised no red flags, and the church community welcomed him as someone who had found redemption through faith. White quickly earned their trust, took on ministry duties, and became a respected member of the congregation, always ready to lend a hand. The lack of true accountability for two serious offenses and a shallow level of oversight allowed John White not only to walk free, but to carefully construct a new public image. His persona as a pastor, a helpful neighbor, and a reliable partner was the result of deliberate self-reinvention. Neither the courts, nor the church, nor those around him had the full picture. The real extent of his criminal past only came to light after Rebecca Gay went missing. After John White admitted to having a criminal record, investigators had legal grounds to search his home and vehicle. Given the conflicting statements, his concealed past, and growing suspicions, a search warrant was quickly issued. Officers thoroughly examined his trailer and pickup truck, looking for anything that might connect him to Rebecca's disappearance. Inside the cab of the vehicle, they found a bag containing highly suspicious items: plastic zip ties, large contractor trash bags, women's undergarments in a small size, and a broken necklace matching the one Rebecca was known to wear regularly. Red stains, resembling blood, were observed on the seats. These discoveries significantly heightened suspicions, especially since White continued to deny any involvement. Then, inside the trailer, police located a rubber mallet with reddish-brown stains, used towels, and various cleaning agents. Forensic analysis confirmed the presence of blood. All signs pointed to an act of aggression and an attempt to cover it up. White's statements had lost all credibility, yet he continued to insist he had no idea what had happened to Rebecca. The interrogation lasted nearly 24 hours. Investigators understood that getting a direct confession from John White wouldn't be easy, so they applied psychological pressure. They focused on two figures they believed would trigger an emotional response: Sally Gee, his fiancée, and her grandson Conway, whom White had spent a great deal of time with. Detectives described in detail what happens to a body if it isn't found, the stages of decomposition, and the haunting image Rebecca's mother might eventually face. They emphasized that his silence would condemn Sally to a lifetime of unanswered questions, and that her grandson might never know what happened to his mother. These arguments weren't meant to persuade, they were meant to push. For a while, White remained silent. Then he asked for an attorney. Once alone, he requested his final phone call. The late-night conversation between the pastor and Sally was brief. John didn't explain anything. He simply told her that she had always been his greatest support, but now she would likely never want to speak to him again. He apologized and hung up. Returning to the interrogation, he said he was ready to cooperate. He was willing to confess in exchange for avoiding capital punishment and receiving a life sentence instead. White confessed that on the night before Halloween, he had been browsing websites with highly disturbing content and was in a state of intense agitation. He drank several beers and intentionally left Rebecca's back door unlocked. Around 2 a.m., he entered her home. Hearing a sound, Rebecca came out of her bedroom. That's when White struck her in the head multiple times with a rubber mallet. According to him, she recognized him. Realizing she was still alive, he placed a plastic zip tie around her neck and waited until her breathing stopped. He then moved her to the kitchen and removed her clothing. When asked whether anything further occurred, he said he couldn't remember. He gathered the bloodied towels and Rebecca's belongings and placed everything, including her body, into a large contractor bag. He tossed her phone and keys into a dumpster and intentionally parked her car near the neighborhood bar to mislead authorities. Then, he returned home and went to sleep, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, he dropped Conway off at his father's. The details of his confession aligned with the physical evidence. White led investigators to a ravine near the trailer park, where he had hidden the body. There, they found Rebecca's remains. Forensic experts confirmed that the injuries matched the method he had described. John White's confession marked a turning point in the investigation. All that remained was to finalize the case and bring it before the court. The entire story, was now known. Every grim detail. Following his confession, the case moved swiftly through the legal system. White accepted a plea deal, life in prison with no possibility of appeal, in exchange for the prosecution waiving the death penalty. His confession was considered credible, backed by detailed knowledge of the crime scene and specifics that only the perpetrator and investigators could have known. At the hearing, White formally admitted to the crime. He remained calm, did not dispute the facts, and offered no excuses. The prosecution presented the evidence, items recovered from his home and vehicle, forensic reports, witness testimonies, and the defendant's own confession. All of it pointed to a premeditated act driven by deeply troubling motives. The court sentenced John Douglas White to a term of 56 to 85 years in prison. This meant he would not be eligible for parole for at least 56 years. At 55 years old, his earliest possible release date would fall at age 111, effectively ensuring he would never re-enter society. Taking into account his confession and his prior crimes, attacks and homicides involving women, the judge stated clearly, "Some people do not belong in society. You are one of them." Rebecca's family responded with quiet dignity. Sally Gee did not attend the court session. She had been informed of the details in advance. The loss was particularly devastating for her. She had not only lost her daughter, but had also learned that her fiancé had been living a double life as a repeat offender who had hidden his history for decades. Rebecca's relatives expressed hope that the sentence would represent justice, even though they knew it couldn't bring her back. 4 months after sentencing, on August 28, 2013, John White was found deceased in his prison cell. According to the official report, he had taken his own life by hanging. Specifics were not disclosed, but the Department of Corrections confirmed his passing. His death triggered an internal review. Staff had not reported any warning signs. White had not been placed under special observation, and he had shown no visible signs of self-harming behavior. His death reignited a wave of questions. How had someone with such a past managed to earn people's trust again, become a pastor, and gain close access to women and families? Why was a man twice convicted of serious crimes not under constant supervision after release? Why was the public not informed of his background? And how did a church accept him into a position of authority, believing the story he'd fabricated? John White's case became a chilling example of systemic failure. No one identified the danger he posed. Despite convictions, confessions, and psychiatric evaluations, he was released, changed his identity, rebuilt trust, and committed another crime. This story revealed how outward appearances, good reputation, religious image, and community involvement can conceal a much darker reality. For decades, White had shaped himself to meet the expectations of those around him, using that persona to mask his true intentions. His conviction and eventual death didn't close the chapter. They only highlighted the scale of what had been overlooked. Following his passing, state authorities began reassessing parole policies. But for Rebecca, her son, and her family, it came far too late. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.